I have always wanted to really do something great, to make my mark, but I never quite got there. When I was a kid, my parents and teachers always told me how smart I was and how much I was going to accomplish. And I took those expectations to heart, but I never felt like I met them. I knew growing up that I wanted to be a lawyer, so I used to think if I got into a great law school, maybe that would be the ego boost I needed to prove to everyone how smart I am. But I didn't go to Harvard or Yale. I went to the University of Wisconsin. Perfectly good school, but it wasn't quite the thing. Then I thought, if I got a great legal job after graduation, that would be the thing. But I didn't clerk for the Supreme Court or go work at the most prestigious law firm in the country. I went to work with my father at his law practice here in Austin. Perfectly fine, but it wasn't quite the thing. And the people around me, my friends and family, they were supportive. They acted impressed with my accomplishments, but I didn't quite believe them. And I spent years with this negative self-perception, this burden, looking for that accomplishment that would allow me to feel good about myself and feel like I had made the people in my life proud. In 2021, I had been working with my father for 7 or 8 years. He was getting ready to retire, and I had basically taken over the firm. One day I got a call from Comal County, New Braunfels, a very conservative, pro-law enforcement county. They were appointing me to represent a man accused of capital murder. Goes without saying, a capital murder case is the most serious case you can defend somebody on. It's literally life or death. And so when I got that call, I thought, maybe this is the thing. If I could win this case, win this county, maybe that would be the accomplishment I've been looking for. Just to talk about the facts very briefly, this is a classic case of guilty by association. There were 2 men who robbed and killed a woman at her apartment in New Braunfels. But my client was not one of those 2 men. He was a 3rd man who was not there that night at all, even according to the police. But he was friends with the 2 guys who did it and was dating the victim's roommate. And so the police looked at the situation and said, this guy must have been in on the plan. Guilty by association. And so I got to work. Over the next 2 years, I put hundreds of hours into this case. There were videos to watch, hundreds of them, thousands of texts and files and photos to look at, audio recordings to listen to. There were witnesses to speak to, arguments to craft, hearings to attend, exhibits to prepare. I stopped taking other cases, and even when I was doing other things, hanging out with my friends, I felt like I wasn't even there. I was so obsessed with this case, not just because it was serious, but because so much of my self-image was wrapped up in the outcome. The trial started in February 2024, right before Valentine's Day, and maybe there's some irony in that. If you've ever had jury duty, you know you don't actually start with 12 people. You start with a big panel of people, and we whittle it down to 12. We had gotten an important concession before the trial started from the DA's office, which was that they were not going to seek the death penalty for our client. Now, they were still seeking life without parole, so he was still in serious trouble. But when that big panel of people, those Comal County jurors, potential jurors, heard that the death penalty was off the table, there was a revolution in that courtroom. People went crazy. They were so upset that they did not have the option to execute our client. Keep in mind, the trial had not started yet. They had not heard any evidence at all. And they're already ready to kill this guy. While that might sound like a fiasco, it actually worked out to our benefit because those people were so outspoken that we were able to stop them from getting onto the jury. And so when the dust settled and the smoke cleared, we looked over in the jury box and saw 12 people who, they didn't look like a bunch of hippies from Austin, but I didn't feel like we were behind the 8 ball either. Being in this trial, I felt like I was in a pressure cooker. Every move I made, the questions I asked, even the facial expressions I made, I knew that people were watching me. Not just the jury, but the judge, the people in the gallery. This was really my trial. My dad was just there to stop me from having a nervous breakdown. The first day or so, my client would ask me every time we got to a break, "How do you think it's going? How do you think it's going? How do you think it's going?" At one point, I just snapped and I told him, "If you ask me that one more time, there's going to be a murder in this courtroom." We had all kinds of problems. At one point, I was cross-examining the state's lead detective using Google Earth images, like up on a projector, when all of a sudden, the county's internet goes out. So I can't continue my questioning. So we ask what the problem is, and they say, well, it's an issue with the county's internet server, which, get this, is in the prosecutor's office. So they might have been putting their thumbs on the scales a little bit. Finally, we got to the end of the trial, closing arguments. And because each side had 2 attorneys, we each got to give 2 arguments. And so the prosecutor spoke, and then my father did, and I wrapped things up. And I talked about the facts and the evidence, but most of all about the state's burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The idea that they have to prove that this man is guilty. He doesn't have to prove his innocence. And my last words to the jury were that they, the prosecution, have a burden. And I ask you, I plead with you, I beg you to hold them to their burden. And with that, we transferred the burden of the decision to that jury. And we didn't hear back from them the first day. And we didn't hear back from them the second day. Evening of the third day, they sent a note asking how much longer they were going to have to deliberate. The judge didn't answer. He just sent back a dinner menu. That's cold, right? Late into the evening, the prosecution approached us with a plea offer for our client. But he rejected the idea out of hand. He was not even there when this happened. We were going to wait on the jury's decision. And 5 minutes later, we had it. We got a call. They had reached a verdict. As we walked into that courtroom, I felt it in my bones that we had lost. And I felt terrible because I hadn't just invested so much time and energy into this case, but so much emotion. They say that when a jury comes in, you can tell what their verdict's going to be based on whether they're looking at the defendant or not, because you're not going to look somebody in the eyes if you're sending them to prison. But I didn't want to see that. I couldn't take it. So I just looked down at the table in front of me. The judge asked us to stand up, to rise with our client, and so we did. And the foreperson of the jury handed the judge a piece of paper. And the judge read out, "Verdict of the jury. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty of the crime of capital murder as charged in the indictment. As we walked out of the courtroom, my dad put his arm around me and told me, "This is how it feels to save a man's life." And I can say that was the thing I had been looking for.